Good morning. You're watching Sunrise live from Birmingham this morning. Philip Hammond preparing to give his first autumn statement as Chancellor of the Exchequer later on today. And we're here in what the government's called the Midlands Engine, where Mr Hammond will be keen to show how today's economic announcement will help those who are just about managing to get by. But how will Philip Hammond's autumn statement compare to that of his predecessor, George Osborne? Our economics editor, Ed Conway, is at the screen with the details.
Now, why, you might be asking, is today so important? Well, the autumn statement comes 5 months to the day after the EU referendum, and this is the first opportunity for the government to update us on how the economy is doing and tell us what they're actually going to do over the course of the next few years. So we know that there's going to be more money spent on road and rail infrastructure, broadband as well, and affordable housing. We heard about that this morning, £1.4 billion extra. That was a bit of a kind of re-announcement of stuff we heard about at the time of the party conference. Universal credit, some changes to the withdrawal rate for that. National living wage, that's going up to £7.50 an hour. And income tax, big question today. Do we learn that the income tax, tax-free personal allowance, that manifesto pledge is going to be raised? We'll have to wait and see, but everything really depends on a couple of charts, and let me show them to you here. It's all about growth, this one here, and borrowing. First of all, have a look at this growth. This is what was forecast at the time of the budget, so all the way back before that EU referendum. Pretty strong growth over the course of the next few years, 2%, a little bit above that over the coming years. The expectation is the Office for Budget Responsibility will cut that and cut growth, lower growth. Weaker growth means less in the way of tax revenues, which means more borrowing. This is the annual rate of borrowing that they forecast at the time of the budget, and you can see it falling relatively quickly down to this. This is the surplus that George Osborne was so keen on. That probably is out of the window, and of course less in the way of money to spend means fewer measures as well. And of course on top of that we also have the prospect of new fiscal rules from the Chancellor. Now these were the ones that George Osborne had over the course of the last few years. He wanted to get an overall surplus. You saw it just a moment ago there, the kind of negative borrowing by 2019-20, national debt falling every year, that's out the window too, and the welfare spending to be capped as well. We will get new rules, we expect, from the Chancellor today. The big question is what they're going to be and just how much they're going to constrain him and how much he'll be able to spend.
So that's a little flavour of what we can expect from the autumn statement this afternoon. Joining us now in Westminster is Shadow City Minister Jonathan Reynolds. Good morning to you, Mr Reynolds. I've been asking people this morning what they'd like to see and hear from Philip Hammond later this afternoon. So I'll ask you that same question. What do you want to hear from the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, I would like to see a plan. I'd like to see a plan for the country's future prosperity. When we have this new relationship with Europe, I want to know what the government want to do to make sure that's going to be a good future for my constituents and everyone in this country. And what we've heard so far, I'm not convinced. I want to see a proper plan for investment, not just a few announcements, re-announcements here and there. I want to see in those new fiscal rules investment taken out of the way we calculate the deficit, so we're making sure we're making those long-term bets for the future. But also I do want to see help for people on low and middle incomes. And in terms of what we have seen trailed on universal credit, it's not the U-turn, it's not the change to the cuts that's already been announced to people who go out to work but don't earn very much. And essentially, if you are a person on the minimum wage who was going to be losing something like £50 a week, which is quite a lot, you'll now lose £47 a week. So that's still a big cut in your income. So all of the things we've heard so far about trying to get some help to those people who are just about managing, it doesn't seem like it's going to materialise this afternoon.
And when you talk about investment, what we know so far, it seems that the Chancellor is going to announce huge investment for infrastructure for today, roads and rails, some expected £1.3 billion to be spent on that, and investment in infrastructure for the future, around £1 billion to be spent on broadband, £2 billion a year on science, technology, research and development. So he is planning investment.
Well, he's getting it more right than his predecessor was, but it's not the kind of scale that we need. There were very big cuts to investment under George Osborne, and that's one of the reasons why George Osborne couldn't meet any of his own fiscal rules. I mean, it has been a long time since a Conservative Chancellor, came to Parliament and said, we're on course. It's never been the case while I've been an MP. So I want to see an actual framework that says, look, we'll get rid of the deficit on day-to-day spending, but we're going to make those long-term investments for the future in a whole range of things, not just re-announcing what was in the budget 5 months ago. Real long-term future investment, a national investment bank to do that, an independent institution to do that. So there's some things that suggest to us Philip Hammond recognises they haven't been getting it right so far.
More then?
Yes, I want to see investment.
You would want to invest more because where's this money coming from? Because Philip Hammond has admitted that he doesn't really want to borrow anymore. He doesn't want to increase the country's deficit anymore. So where would Labour magic up this money from?
Well, he is going to have to borrow more. I mean, everything we've seen trailed for this statement suggests that borrowing is going to be very much higher than it had planned to be, than he had hoped to be. And that will always be the case unless you're building an economy that can compete on a global stage, that can have the kind of infrastructure that people need in order to do that. So if you get it wrong, you end up borrowing. If you get it right, you end up with a country and an economy that can build that prosperity for the future. And that's not just a Labour position. People like the CBI have said similar things in the run-up to this statement. So it sounds like Philip Hammond knows what he needs to do. He's just not going to do it as much as he needs, and we all need him to understand and go ahead and finish the job.
A small concession from you there, though. You say he's doing better than his predecessor. And let's talk about what the government are planning to do to help those families that are now labelled jams, just about managing. We've heard some of the announcements already that Philip Hammond is going to talk about: an increase to the national living wage, a slightly more generous universal credit system, an investment in affordable homes, and a ban on letting fees. What are your thoughts on those proposals?
Well, it's crucial to recognise, in terms of what we've seen trailed so far on universal credit, it's not a more generous system of universal credit. They're just not going to cut it as much as they already announced in the budget. But it's quite modest. If you are a person who is going out to work on a relatively low income, you're earning that income, you're going to see some quite big reductions in your income because of the changes to universal credit that have been announced. So it's not a U-turn on that decision. Essentially, they're not going to take away as much as they said they would, but it's still going to be a big loss. As I say, if you were losing £50 a week, you'll now lose £47 a week. That's not really the help people need, because surely the people who are most struggling are those people going out to work on low incomes.
Do you have a certain degree of sympathy for the Chancellor of the Exchequer today? Because obviously he has to come out and make these announcements and these plans in very uncertain times. We haven't even started to negotiate the country's exit from the EU, and that OBR forecast that's going to be announced today is projecting ahead to the next 5 years. Government may have no idea what the country is going to look like in 5 years' time. So do you have some sympathy for him? He's in a very difficult position.
Sympathy might be too strong a word, but it's certainly true to say, if you look at at what has happened over the last 6 years, there have been 6 wasted years. I mean, if you think the deficit was supposed to be cleared somewhere, before the end of the last Parliament to provide some room for tax cuts for the election, we've obviously got nowhere near that. But Philip Hammond has been a part of that government. He can't completely claim to have no responsibility for that. And clearly, yes, the government's going to recognise to an extent they have got it wrong so far. But if they're not going to do the things that people recognise that they need to do, well, he's got to take responsibility for that. So yes, there is uncertainty, but you tackle that uncertainty by getting an economic plan that makes sure we're going to be a prosperous country going forward. And you make sure that that's a future for everybody, not trying to hit the people who go out to work on low incomes that we're going to see announced at 12:30 today. So I wouldn't say sympathy, but he's going to change some things. But is he going to go all the way? No, I don't think he's going to get it right today.
OK, Shadow City Minister Jonathan Reynolds, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Sunrise.